Okay, now that we've downloaded Skeleton, it's time just to add the resources that we need from the Skeleton package to our website so that we can start to upfit our site to be responsive. Now, I downloaded that package into my project folder, which is just my GRD 188 folder. I am going to unzip that file. And when you look in here, we've got a couple of things that we don't need, which is this index page. So if you open that up with a browser, it's just kind of a placeholder to let you know how to use Skeleton and to give you a link to their documentation. But then if we come back here, we've also got an images folder. It's just got the Skeleton logo in there as a favicon. So that's what shows up right here when you open up the page. And in the CSS folder, we have two style sheets. We have Normalize and we have Skeleton. Now, Normalize is what's called a CSS reset. And what that is a style sheet that returns all browser defaults from Firefox or Chrome or Edge or any of the others out there and makes the baseline set of styles that are being applied to the content on every page the same. And the reason that that's necessary is because every browser is made by a different company. They're all what we would call proprietary. And what that means is that the company that made the browser only made it because they thought that they could make a better browser than the ones that are already out there. And with that came some default styling just for, baseline H1s, H2s, paragraphs, things like that, so that the text on the page has some sort of a hierarchy. And they're all a lot the same, but they're just slightly different. And what Normalize does is it returns them all to the same baseline so that you can be sure that everything that you are changing in one browser is going to look the same in another browser, at least within reason. So we want to add Normalize, and normally we would start, by the way, with a CSS reset. So the fact that we've gotten this far in the design process is unusual. Normally for a website, one of the first things you would add would be a CSS reset that you use on a regular basis. But since we're just learning about web design, we're doing some things out of order because you really wouldn't know why you needed a CSS reset until you had worked with CSS a little bit. And then Skeleton obviously is a style sheet that's going to give us our responsive grid so that we can make our site responsive. Now all I need to add Skeleton is just to put these two style sheets in my CSS folder. And we've already got a couple in there. We've got Font Awesome's style sheet called all.min.css, and then we've got styles.css as well. That's our custom style sheet. So now that we've got those two in here, we actually don't need this Skeleton download anymore, so we can move that to the trash. And we can come back to our code and add in the code that we need for these. Now I've already done that. And all I did was just to add a comment here that explains what Normalize does, preferably in your own words, but just that it's a CSS reset. And then I provided a relative path that leads to that style sheet in the form of the link element here in the head. And I did the same thing with Skeleton. So Skeleton CSS gives me a responsive grid for my website as the comment that I used. And then I have a link that is leading to the Skeleton style sheet within my file structure. Once I do that, I can start making my site responsive. But let's take a look and see what we've got from adding those two things. Now remember, when you add them, by the way, we really want to move from the most general at the top to the most custom at the bottom. And that order of style sheets does become important because that affects which style sheets win in the hierarchy of specificity, basically, for CSS. And so styles, like all things being equal, if you style, for example, a p tag, right, a p element or a type selector for paragraphs in this style sheet, and then you style it again, you style the same attribute but with a different value. So for example, if in Normalize or Skeleton we style paragraphs to use Times New Roman, and then in our custom styles we style paragraphs to use Helvetica, this style sheet that is lower, all other things being equal, is more likely to win. There's a little more to it than that. It can get a little bit more complicated than that, but that's just one of the ways that we can try to make the job of overriding other styles a little bit easier on ourselves. So that being said, let's take a look at what we've got here. I am going to save my work, and I'm going to come back to my template here and reload my page. And what we are seeing here is that what I just told you is not applying, right? So there are some things that are taking place in the Skeleton style sheet that are overriding my custom styles. And that might be a little bit frustrating for you, especially if you're not used to doing this. So if I inspect, what I can find is that for H1s, if I visit the Sources tab, I see 2 style sheets open now in my developer tools, and these are the 2 that are probably affecting that element that I'm examining right here. And what that means is that something in Skeleton is changing my headings, right? So if I come down here to see the styles that are being applied, I can see that the font family that I selected is still being applied, but something is going on here that's making it behave differently. And it looks like the one that's being applied to paragraphs is completely different, right? And so let's see, yeah, that one's getting, well, it's still saying it's getting dosis, but that doesn't look like the one that I styled, right? And now we're seeing here that it might be falling back to Skeleton's style sheet here. So I've not figured out why this is happening yet. I suspect that it might be to do with variables being relatively new. And the other possibility is that within Skeleton, if I come and I look at the typography styles, I'm seeing that the body is being declared separately from the HTML tag, so that could have something to do with it as well. One way or another, I'm going to do something here that I normally would recommend we not do. But in this case, I could see a good use for it because all we really want from Skeleton is the grid. And so everything that we're seeing after right here, where we see these offset by 1/2 dot columns, all of these classes that are to do with a dot columns are the ones that are the grid. And we can even see from the table of contents here at the top that the grid is the first thing. And then we have base styles, typography, links, button, forms, lists, code, table, spacing, utilities, clearing, and media queries. And the truth is, all we want Skeleton for is this grid. And so one of the reasons we recommend that you never, update someone else's style sheet and that you override it if you can, is because that way if the software is updated or if the code is updated, you can just drop the new file in your folder and it won't break your website and you won't have to go back and redo some things. Well, one of the reasons I'm comfortable with doing this with Skeleton is that Skeleton has not been updated since 2014. I do not foresee it updating anytime soon, especially not at least for the purposes of this assignment, in any kind of meaningful way. And so what I'm going to do, rather than trying to override these typographic things, because what I'm seeing here is really just a lot of extra work. You notice my left margin for my lists here has gotten disrupted. And then my typefaces are all a little bit wonkier than they were to begin with. And so there's a lot of things here that I would prefer just not be there. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep all the styles for the grid, and I'm actually going to get rid of the rest. So I'm going to come in here and from base styles on, I'm going to make a very bold move here and just delete everything. That returns my site to more what I expected it to be. And then what I'm going to do though is come to the top here and I'm going to leave a note for myself. And my note is just note to self, everything but the grid has been deleted. And that way I don't have to spend a lot of time going back and undoing things that I've already done with the typography. And for a beginning exploration into CSS, I feel like this is an appropriate way to go about it. But I do want you to keep in mind that we would normally not modify a third-party style sheet. We would normally try to override the things that we're needing to change in our own style sheet. But in this case, I can see a pretty good use case for it. So I am going to do a quick save as on Skeleton here and see if I can override it in my CSS folder. For some reason, it does not want to do that, or it says it doesn't want to do that. Let's see what happens if I reload the page. It might have actually done it. And yeah, it looks like it did. So let me make sure of that. I'm going to clear my cache and make sure that I'm not being served a cached version. And then I'm going to come back and reload one more time, and I can see that my note to self is here, and that's the last thing that I did, and everything but the grid is gone. So now we can continue to move on and update our website to be responsive. Let's see if we have any more HTML items to update, at least just to get set up. And I would say no. At this point, I think we're in good shape. The only thing you may want to do is, again, use the developer tools if you see some things that are out of place from the typographic styling that you've already done in previous assignments. I can see a few things, like normalize might have changed, but overall, I think everything's looking pretty good. So what we're going to do next is work on our navigation bar. And we will tackle that in a new video since it might take a few minutes to get it sorted out.